Hey, enjoyment of music. I hope you are doing well and ready for week two. So, here we go. We're going to begin discussing the fundamentals of music. Now, if you look in your book, they may call it, I don't remember if they call it the fundamentals or they might call it the materials of music or the elements of music. It all refers to the same thing. We're talking about some household terms or vocabulary terms that you've probably heard and probably have some kind of an understanding of already. Even if you don't have a musical background, I would say you probably have at least a basic understanding of what melody is or what rhythm is. And those are the kinds of things that we're going to be going over. Now, this, as you can see, is part one. There are enough of these items, and I want to go into enough detail where it would make for a very long presentation if I did it all in one. So I'm going to split them into three. So here is the first, and the second will probably come later in the week, and the third will probably come next week. It's at least a week and a half to 2 weeks that we're dealing with in terms of the fundamentals. So without further delay, let me move on to the next slide, although I must admit that that is a really cool painting of Mozart. Of course, the sunglasses were sort of photoshopped in by somebody, but I think it fits with the overall image of Mozart being one of the coolest people in music history. All right, so let's start with rhythm. Movement of music through time, because music is an artistic form of expression that exists only in time. It does not exist in space. So a painting that exists in two-dimensional space and a sculpture exists in three-dimensional space. Music doesn't exist in space. It exists over time, right? And where you get a pattern from is when you combine sounds, and different moments of silence, and they're different lengths. So, for example, some might be longer or shorter than others. So, if I were to give you a basic pattern, da, 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 everything is the same there, and it's not particularly interesting. But if I were to go da, 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 da. So, some of those das were longer or shorter than others. That's where you get the pattern. When you have a bunch of different sounds mixed in with different silences that give you a pattern because of the different lengths. Now, let's just for a moment talk about silences. Yes, you do need silence in music. Like Mozart, going back to Mozart, once said famously in a letter of his, the silences in music are like the holes in a doily cloth. Without them, you have no pattern at all. Now, there are two kinds of silences in music. There are the literal kind. So, for example, if I were to do something like da 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 da, da 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 da, da 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 da, da 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 dum. Okay, I just made that up off the top of my head, so forgive me if it's not the most interesting melody you've ever heard. But those little moments of silence in there, they're essential to the pattern. Without them, the pattern will be very different. Da 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 da. Neither of those is any better or worse, but they're just different. So that's where you get a literal silence, and a perceived silence is a little different. What we mean when we say a perceived silence is where there's sound happening and the music is going on and everybody doesn't stop playing, but somebody stops playing. And either consciously or subconsciously, the listener recognizes that it's different. The best example I can give is if there's some kind of a solo, like, say, a saxophone solo. So the saxophone or a guitar solo. So the song is playing, and then in the middle of the song, the guitar player goes into this big solo, and everybody's focusing on the guitar because it's playing this really great solo. And then when the solo ends, the guitar shuffles way back into the background, and it either stops playing altogether or it's just playing some very quiet, soft little chords as part of the overall framework. That's a perceived silence because we're no longer focusing on the guitar. Anyway, when you combine sound and silence in patterns, you have rhythm. Now, the fundamental basic unit of rhythm is the beat. The beat is just a pulse. Think of your heartbeat. Your heartbeat is very similar to a beat in a piece of music. It's a consistent, steady pulse. And that's what you have in music. It's what you tap your foot to. So the next time you're listening to a song and you're going tap, 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 tap with your foot, you've found the beat. And again, more often than not, it's subconscious. We're not even thinking of it consciously. We just start tapping our foot, right? That is the beat. It is the fundamental unit, the basic unit of rhythm. Now, we're going to shift gears for just a moment or two and talk about something that is a part of rhythm, and it's a part of the way that beat transpires in music. But we're going to venture into another realm as well, and that is speaking. Because if you compare speaking to a performance of music, there's a lot of similarity going on there rhythmically. For example, when we speak, not all words or not all syllables have the same level of importance. Some have more emphasis than others. I have a really great demonstration that I'm going to do on this in a few minutes, but for now, we'll just leave it at that. Just remember when we come back to it that when we speak or when we're reading and hearing words in our mind as we read, we're hearing a certain pattern of some words and some syllables and some parts of a phrase having greater strength or gravity, more emphasis than others. The same is exactly true in music. Some beats are more important, or maybe not more important, but are heavier. Again, they have more weight, more emphasis than others. That's what brings us to meter. We call this meter, the way beats are organized, because a piece of music with a beat is not just, beat, 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 boom, 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 an endless stream of booms. If it were, it would be rather dull and uninteresting. When you organize that beat, it gives it a little bit more meaning. And how the beat is organized is into equal groups that are based on some beats being stronger or having more emphasis than others. So here are the three most common types of meters. Now, there are others, and anybody that has a background, played an instrument, sung in chorus, played an orchestra, you already know this. There is definitely more, but 2, 3, and 4 are the basics. They're the most common, and pretty much the other ones tend to come from a combination of these anyway. So, for example, we have grouping the beat into equal groups of 2. So rather than just beat, 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 it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. We call that duple meter. And the 1 in all of these, the 1 is the really strong beat. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Now, that doesn't mean that it necessarily has to be louder. In fact, much of the time, or most of the time, it's really not louder. It just has more emphasis to it. 3 would be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, like a waltz. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And, of course, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Notice in that one, 3 is also a little strong. It's stronger than 2 and 4, but it's weaker than 1. So 1 is really strong, 2 is weak, 3 is sort of strong, and 4 is weak. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, again, I'm speaking them louder just to point it out, but it's not going to feel that way in a piece of music. Not all the time. Most of the time, not. Okay, so let me give it to you actually in a musical example. Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. I know, not the most interesting melody that you've ever heard, but we're all familiar with it. So here's the melody. Really quickly, I'll play it on the piano. Take a listen. Okay, so now when you listen to that, whether or not you were tapping your foot, there's probably some part of you that was feeling it in either groups of 2 or 4, because 2 and 4, just like they're divisible in math, well, they're divisible in music too. Now, that doesn't mean that they're always interchangeable. Sometimes a piece of music is clearly in 2 or clearly in 4. Sometimes you can do it either way. So, for example, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and I'll sing it this time, we could count it 1 and 2 and 1 and 2, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. Or we could count it 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Either way it works. It changes the rhythmic flavor a little bit between the two, but they both work perfectly fine. Now, it would never work with 3. Remember, 1 is always the strong beat. Now, just imagine if I'm going to exaggerate it so it becomes obvious, but imagine if we were counting it like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3 and 1 and 2, 3 and 1 and 2 and 3, 1 and 2 and 3 and 1. So the accent is constantly changing. Sometimes it's on 1, sometimes it's on 3, sometimes it's on 2. It doesn't really work, right? Interesting, but not really feasible for that particular song. So that's our basic meters. Again, there are others. There's 6, there's 7, there's 5. But those are a little bit beyond the scope of our discussion here. All right. Syncopation. This is really cool. So syncopation is when we, in music, intentionally put accents or emphasize something that would normally not be emphasized. It's basically when you put an emphasis or an accent on either a weak beat or a weak part of the beat, because the beats also divide. We could have 1, 2, or 1 and 2 and those ands are the division of the beat. And so if you take something that is normally on a weak spot of the rhythm and you emphasize it by making it really loud or by strumming an unexpected chord, that's what syncopation is. Now, all right, to really understand it, we're going to want to get back into spoken language. Remember this, accents like words in spoken language, some beats have more emphasis than others. Excellent. So here is a simple phrase, and I put in some bold formatting to kind of highlight the point I'm going for here. The simple phrase is just, tonight I am making macaroni for dinner. Now, if you look at where the bold is for that first version, is putting accents where we would never speak it. We would never say, tonight I am making macaroni for dinner. And that's basically what you have here. We might say, tonight I am making macaroni for dinner. We put the accents in different places. Look at the second one. Tonight, I am making macaroni for dinner. Now that works. The next one works as well. Tonight, I am making macaroni for dinner. The meaning between these two is totally different now. By changing what's accented, we've changed the entire meaning of the sentence. Tonight, I am making macaroni for dinner. That means I'm not making hot dogs. I'm not making soup. I'm making macaroni. When I switch the emphasis from macaroni to making, it implies something different. Tonight, I am making macaroni for dinner. I'm not buying it pre-made. I'm not going to the grocery store to pick it up. I'm not going to a restaurant. No, instead, I'm going to put my chef hat on and I am making macaroni. How about the last one? Tonight, I am making macaroni for dinner. Not you, not your sister, not the dog. I am making macaroni. So by shifting what is being accented in this sentence, we totally change the meaning. The same thing happens in music. When we shift what is being emphasized, we change the meaning of the music. We change the whole feel of it. So, for example, again, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Bum, 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 ba-dum, bum, 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 ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-da-dum, bum, ba-dum. I'm changing accents all over the place. That is making it more interesting, but it's also changing the overall, our perception and understanding of the melody. Now, syncopation would be going back a couple of slides, syncopation would be if we put the accent where we really wouldn't expect it. So, bum 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 bum. We don't expect an emphasis on that part of a beat, right? You know what's different between music and words? When we do this one, tonight I am making macaroni for dinner. It sounds ridiculous. It sounds cool in music. It's not the same at all. When we emphasize words or parts of a sentence incorrectly, it sounds strange. But when we change things up and do it in an unexpected way in music, it only tends to make the music more interesting. Now, it's like salt or spice in food. A little bit goes a long way. Too much, and then it starts to lose meaning and relevance. If everything is syncopated, if everything is accenting the weaker parts, then there are no weaker parts, and it loses all definition. It kind of kills the concept in the first place. But I think it's cool. I like how that works, between language and music. It's a really interesting parallel. All right. Now that pretty much finishes us up with the basics of rhythm. Having said that, there's plenty more to learn about rhythm, and over the course of the semester, we will have more opportunities. Right now, we're just trying to get through the basic definitions. So moving on from rhythm to melody. It is a series of musical pitches or tones. You can say pitches or tones or notes, kind of interchangeably. And this group of pitches, or this series of pitches, create some sort of a unit that is recognizable and memorable. Basically, when you have a melody, you don't just have a collection of individual notes, you have a collection of notes that means more together than they would individually. So here is a collection of notes. Well, it's just 4 notes, C, D, E, and F. They don't really have any meaning. If I ask you to remember that, you'll probably forget it in 5 minutes. I know I already have. But once you play them in such a way with a rhythmic pattern, the same notes, it suddenly takes on a whole new meaning. So in anything that I just played, the first example or the second example, it's the same notes. It's C, D, E, and F. But the melody is much more important. Those notes together make a unit that is way more important than they ever could individually. There are some aspects of melody to consider, like the range of the melody. That's just the distance from the lowest note to the highest note. It's why certain songs are really hard to sing, because it has a wide range. And the lowest note that you're expected to sing is kind of far away from the highest note that you're expected to sing. So you have to have quite a vocal range. Most melodies have, a moderate range. You don't want it to be too narrow, but you also don't want it to be too excessively wide as well. Contour. This is a really interesting one. And this actually gives me an opportunity to clarify a little bit of what I said earlier, and that is, music exists in time, it doesn't exist in space. Nevertheless, music does have shape. It's a shape that we more perceive from how it sounds rather than anything in terms of how it looks. Although there's even an exception to that. If you look at sheet music, you will see visual patterns spatially laid out on the page, but they're really unimportant. It's just a means of communicating, so somebody could look at that music and then play it. But there are these elements of a shape that we perceive when we're listening to music, and contour in melody is one of them. It's the line or the linear shape of a melody, and it's simply created by a mix of rising and falling notes. So you might go up, 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 or come down, 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 down. And either way, when you mix those two, that's when you get the contour. So here are some examples of contour. Let's look at the first one. This would be a melody or a part of a melody where the notes keep getting higher. Da 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 dum. Now, if you just kept doing that, eventually the notes would get so high they would be unlistenable, and it just would be very boring. It might be boring eventually, but nothing is as boring as this. This is a flat line. That's literally when you repeat the same note. No matter what kind of exciting rhythmic pattern I get, eventually it's going to get really dull. And it won't take much time for that to happen. That's because it's just a flat line, right? I jokingly call these cardiac melodies. They're dead on arrival. Now, does that mean you should never, ever, ever do that? Well, no, of course. In music, there are very few nevers. There are some really great pieces of music that have a moment of flatlining melody. But what makes it interesting is everything else is changing around it. The chords are changing, the rhythm might be changing. And even in those cases where it's exciting and very effective, even in those cases, it's temporary. It's not going to go on for the whole song. It'll go on for a couple of seconds, maybe 10 seconds at most. But generally, if you look at the bottom, that's kind of what a good songwriter goes for. Whether they're writing a rock song or a symphony, they're going for a melody that has kind of a contour. It goes up a little, comes down a little. Now, that's not random, this little design here. I actually deliberately drew this to represent a very real melody, and hopefully a very familiar melody. Eleanor Rigby picks up the rice in a church where a wedding has been, lives in a dream. Right? So I'm singing and moving the mouse arrow as we go. Eleanor Rigby. So it goes up and then it comes down. Goes up. Picks up the rice in a church where a wedding has been. Flat line for a moment. Holds that one note. Been. Lives in a dream. Great song. And that's just a nice example of a melodic contour. All right, moving along. See, now I really want to hear Eleanor Rigby. Phrase structure. Melodies also have phrase structure. Like sentences in spoken word and written language, melodies are divided into phrases and subphrases. So, tonight I will go to the store and I will buy groceries for tomorrow's dinner. Well, do you notice there was a little bit of a pause there? That pause is where we would put a comma. Tonight I will go to the store, comma, and I will buy groceries for tomorrow's dinner, period. Notice how I changed my inflection in such a way that made you know that there was more to come. Tonight I will go to the store. Now, if I don't say anything else, you're going to be thinking, yeah, and? But how about if I just said, tonight I will go to the store? The way I expressed it is telling you that that's it. That's all the information you're going to get, and it's a complete thought. The melodies do the same thing, right? Bum, 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 bum. That's one phrase, and it really doesn't sound finished. Not until you go bum, 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 bum. So two separate phrases make for a sentence. Bum, 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 comma, bum, 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 period. Excellent. So now we know phrase structure. And just like when we're speaking, there are climaxes in a melody or in a melodic phrase. It's where the melody reaches the highest level of intensity. Harmony. Well, if you can think of melody as the linear space, the horizontal, harmony is the vertical. It's when you have this note and maybe this note and maybe this note all at the same time. Right? So it's the simultaneous sounding of two or more musical tones. Like a melody, again, the collection is more important than the individual parts. Here is a specific chord. We call that the G7 or the G major minor 7. It consists of G, B, D, F. Now, you don't have to remember those notes. I'm just saying there's a G, a B, a D, and an F. Well, none of those notes are so important by themselves, but when you put them together, now that has meaning, right? In the context of a piece of music, that's going to say something important. All right. So to have harmony, you only need 2 simultaneous notes. To have a chord, you need to have at least 3. Now, there are specific types of chords that require certain notes, but by definition, I could play any group of notes. I could just literally slam my hand on the keys. How's that for a weird sound? And that's technically a chord. That's a harmony, and it's also a chord, because I played like 7 notes all at once. But we do get a little more organized. And one of the ways we get a little more organized is by talking about the difference between consonant and dissonant. Consonant, dissonant. So, what does it mean to be consonant? Consonant basically means when you have a harmonic sound that seems like it's stable, it's at rest, it's complete. It doesn't have an excessive amount of musical tension to it. So if I play that chord there, and if anyone is wondering, it's a C major chord, it kind of has a feeling of being reposed. Or even if I just play 2 of the notes in that chord, it doesn't have a lot of tension. However, if I play these 2 notes, or these 2, right, there's a lot of tension there. Now, that we call dissonant. Dissonant is any harmonic sound that seems tense. It's unresolved, and it needs to find release. And the way you find release is you move away from that tension. If I have this, that's moving from the dissonant sound to the consonant. Now, I'd like to add in, and this is very important, this is not a good or bad thing. This is not a better or worse. Interesting music will need both consonant harmony and dissonant harmony. Otherwise, it's going to be really boring. I like to use food metaphors. Again, a recipe that has too much salt would be too much dissonance. Too much sugar would be too much consonant. You need tension. You need some angularity. You need some stress in order for the piece to sound like it's going somewhere, right? All right. One further thing to talk about in harmony, and that is progression. If you have a background, you've probably heard phrases like chord progression. So what a chord progression is just simply when you move from one chord to the next chord to the next chord and so on, and then that creates a sort of a chord sentence, as it were, that has meaning. And again, these chords have more meaning together than apart. I love how I can use that sentiment to refer to melody. The individual notes mean more when they're together. And harmony. The individual notes mean more when they're together as a chord. And even with progression, the individual chords will have more meaning when you put them together and make a progression. There's like 5 or 6 different chords in that progression, right? And so that's where we get the musical meaning. And that's what chord progression is, right? So cool. We've talked about rhythm, melody, and harmony. In the next presentation, we're going to talk about things like texture and expression, some really cool stuff. So that's it for today. And as always, if you have any questions, of course, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to explain this stuff in more detail. Let me just make a final recommendation that the way you really learn to understand these on a deep level is just by paying attention when you listen to music. Tap your foot. Try to count the meter. Am I counting to 2? Am I counting to 3? Am I counting to 4? Try to sing the melody. Try to determine, does it have a wide range or a narrow range? Your first assignment on this is coming up, and it's going to deal with all of those things and give you a chance to practice it. And the goal is we'll do these kinds of things again later in the semester, and hopefully by that point, you'll have had enough practice where it'll be more second nature for you. So anyway, that's it for today. In the meantime, go off and have a wonderful day. And as I say, There will be a second presentation sometime later this week. I will let you know when it's available. Until then, happy listening.